It's the thing, man. Like it goes back to the what we do here is creativity, and what we do here is building our own category. And we are not Kentucky bourbon, and we stopped a long time ago trying to be Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah,
we're not anymore. We don't care. Like, and that's so fucking Texan. It's like we don't care. Like, nah, we don't care. We're not. Nah.
You do you.
Meh. Yeah. Whatever. Straight Kentucky blah. We don't care. Whatever. Do your thing, man. No, it's great. I'm sure I'll drink some, and I'll go over to Randy's house and have a bunch of fucking Kentucky bourbon. But like, I don't care. Like, it is what it is.
Hey everybody out there in Bourbon Real Talk land, Randy Sullivan with a very special guest for you today.
You're so enthusiastic.
I know. I get in trouble because my wife tells me, like, you need to, like, take it down a notch.
Chill.
And I'm like, I'm legit excited.
But I like this. This is fun.
This is fun, yeah. So this is Nico, who is an actual author.
I am. I've at one point I had the #1 selling travel book on Amazon.
Okay.
I don't know how many minutes that was the case, but I do have that screenshot.
I was the #3 podcast
Nice.
for 1 week.
Hell yeah!
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
You gotta snap that when you can, man.
You gotta take your wins. You gotta take your wins.
Absolutely.
So what all books have you written?
So the way that it all kind of went down, the reason that we're talking right now is because I'm working on a new book called Texas Whiskey, and it's with the same publishing company. It's Cider Mill Press that I did my previous book with, and so I guess it's 4 years ago. Cider Mill Press cold called me straight up, and they basically said, "Hey, so we own the IP for a book called Texas Cocktails, and somebody is going to write this book called Texas Cocktails, and we were wondering if you would like to write it." And it happened to be like in a time when I was working on a new startup and we're sort of waiting on investment and yada yada yada. It just sort of kind of fit my time frame, so I said, all right. Yeah. And then, arrogantly, I thought, well, I mean, if I don't write this book, what is this book going to be? And shouldn't it be my voice to the Texas cocktails? And so I was like, yeah, screw it. Yeah, sure, why not? And then so I wrote Texas Cocktails for him, and it was awesome. It was a really cool experience. The first thing that I did was I researched all of the classic cocktails that come from Texas, and I found both of them. And then at that point, I was like,
a lot of work to do.
Yo, this is gonna be 100 different bars and bartenders and their recipes, and there's your Texas cocktails. How's that sound? They're like, yeah, it's great, perfect, cool. Now I'm gonna crowdsource a cocktail book. Awesome. And so I immediately texted everyone I knew in my phone. Was like, hey, send me a recipe and send me a picture of it and be in this cocktail book. This is what's going on, that kind of thing. And so, so it was really cool. But then part of that was featuring all of the other things that go into the Texas cocktail industry, and so I had the opportunity to go. Like I went and had like a full-on walkthrough at Balcones, and same thing with Treaty Oak, and Tito's would not give me a walkthrough, but just
I wonder why.
I don't know. It's. I mean, haven't you heard the commercials? So but that kind of started getting to know people in the Texas whiskey specific industry. They found me through my work with the San Antonio Cocktail Conference.
Gotcha.
So I'm the director of industry outreach for the San Antonio Cocktail Conference, which that is a very glorified name for Nico goes all over the country doing things, and he should totally talk about SACC while he's out there. And so I do. And then the one actual thing that is part of it is kind of heading up the seminar selections. So there was actually 2 years ago, we did like this Texas Whiskey Summit thing that was kind of an event within the bigger cocktail conference, and basically it was a series of seminars that was happening all day long. That was completely free. It was like part of the tasting room, and so it was just Jared was up there and Dan was up there and Daniel Barnes is up there and just like everybody who has anything to say about Texas whiskey 2 years ago is up on this stage, and it was kind of put together by the Texas Whiskey Association, or just not together, but like in concert with them, and it was really kind of this cool experience. So anyway, they had found me through the stuff that I was doing with SACC.
Were you known as a writer?
No, Lord,
That's so
no.
interesting.
It was really like I have some stuff online, but it's not like. Me and my brother-in-law had this crappy little podcast for a hot minute when he was trying to like make his blog more popular, and I was like, let's do a podcast. And so we were doing the Cocktail Enthusiast podcast. I think we did 8 episodes, but like for the most part, it was just kind of I was doing a lot of teaching. I was doing a lot of seminars.
Gotcha.
And so I come from a digital marketing background, and so like that's what my master's is in. That's sort of what I was doing before the spirits kind of took over everything. It's a weird sentence. That you could take that a lot of different directions.
Yeah, you can.
So I did the digital marketing, and so a lot of what I was doing was I was part of the Portland Cocktail Week and various USBG, United States Bartenders Guild events, and I would go in and I would teach how to brand yourself as a bartender, or if you're opening up a new bar, here marketing 101, or just kind of like that sort of thing. And so I was kind of around doing that. I also have a TED Talk, which is
That's
cool.
pretty unique, yeah.
So there's and with that that was as equally backed into the book did I back into the TED Talk, because I literally had my friend Michelle, who was running the Plano Theater at the time. I think it's a Courtyard Theater, and she was running this theater, and she just hit me up on Facebook, and she was like, "Hey, I have a really weird question. I'm doing this TEDx. We're hosting a TEDx, which is great, and the speakers are awesome. Do you happen to have anything that you could talk about that's light?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Everything we have's on human trafficking and like the change in the death rates. It's a very morose programming right now." And I was like, "Okay, I could talk about digital marketing, which is boring. I could talk about the impact of soccer on the North American sports landscape," because I was working with a soccer team at the time. I was kind of in soccer, and or I could tell you about just the cocktail movement and where it's gone and what it's been. And she's like, "Yeah, do that one. Do the cocktail one." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I hit up Lucky Campbell, who at the time he now owns the Standard Pour, but he just owned Parliament. So I went over to Lucky and was like, "Look, dude, this is what I need. Like, I need like 3 cocktails. You're going to be on the stage with me. Make them at the time. I'll kind of talk to you, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, I'm just going to kind of go, here's the history of the American cocktail." And that's going to be the TED Talk. And so I actually never asked. I don't know if he saw that.
Yeah.
If the publisher actually even saw that. So I don't know. I'm guessing they just did a Google search for cocktails Texas. They found SACC and they looked at the people on the roster of those involved and were like, "He doesn't look busy. Let's ask him." Well, I don't know.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, I get that you build a reputation when you're doing things in that can be found online.
Yeah.
People know you for things. People know me to be an advocate for Texas whiskey.
Yeah, totally.
But if somebody called me and was like, "Hey, we need you to write a book," I'd be like, Have you seen my blog? Right. There's a reason why you haven't.
Right.
I'm not a good writer. Right? Like, so,
Yeah,
I hope you have a killer editor.
Right. And my arrogant ass is like, of course I'll write this book. Who else should write this book? Of course it should be me. Jesus. Yeah, but
so apparently it was a smashing success because they came back to you for another book, right?
Well, at the beginning of the whole pandemic, when we're all like, I don't know if our company is going to make it. What in the hell are we going to do for money? Like, that kind of thing. I popped off this email to my publisher and was like, hey man, you need to let me write a book about Texas whiskey. Mm-hmm. And he responded, you're not going to believe this, but literally on my to-do list is to ask you if you want to write a book about Texas whiskey.
Wow.
Like, yep, let's go. Absolutely. I will take the dozens of dollars you're going to pay me to do this book over doing nothing. So game on, let's make this happen and let's roll.
Nice.
So yeah, it started. It will be coming out it will be coming out Father's Day of next year. So
gotcha.
So June of next year. June. So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now, and I'm just hopping around in the time of COVID. I'm hopping around from distillery to distillery, doing socially distanced views of those that I haven't been to, and just kind of getting to know everybody in the industry. It's interesting. I would love your answer to this too. But the thing that I keep trying to kind of end every conversation I have about the book with is they did the same thing. They bought the IP for the book Texas Whiskey. Like they're the same deal. So and the way that is going to work is because of the way that Google operates. Once the book is out, once you start Googling, if you Google Texas whiskey, that's the thing that it's going to be TX whiskey, and it's going to be this book.
Right.
Because Google puts such a high value on actual books, which is great. And so with that in mind, knowing that soon, once you Google Texas whiskey, this is what's going to come up. What do you hope the book's going to say? What do you hope is in there? And I'm kind of asking everybody at the very end. It's like, of all of the things that I could say about Texas whiskey, what do you hope I say?
That's an interesting question, because for anybody who's watching this or listening to this, Texas whiskey has really had an uphill battle. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason for that is just, Kentucky is such a rich part of American history, and so many people associate American whiskey with Kentucky bourbon, mm-hmm. that it's really difficult for somebody that has any experience with whiskey at all to be drawn to something that's not from Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And as I have gotten to know people, especially producers in the state of Texas, they tell me that their very best customers are people who have just gotten into whiskey for the first time in their lives.
Yeah.
Because they have no preconceived notion.
Right.
They're only judging the whiskey based on its flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And then the opposite end of the spectrum, somebody who's such a high level collector that they've tried everything, they know all that they want to know.
And now they're judging it on the flavor.
And now they're looking for a different experience because they've had 10,000 amazing Kentucky bourbons, mm-hmm. and they want to experience something new, and they're judging it just based on the flavor.
Yeah.
The middle market is where it's the toughest, because somebody who's been into bourbon for just a little bit of time, there's some social pressure to fit in, mm-hmm. and to like the same things that other people like, so that you're well received in the community.
Right.
And so I didn't realize how big of a pile of poo I was stepping in when I became a Texas whiskey advocate, until I released a double-blind study that I did, mm-hmm. where a Texas whiskey beat 4 of the nation's most well-known rye whiskeys.
Isn't it funny how that happens once you start doing it blind?
Yeah, and when I released it, I had people accusing me of faking the results. I had, I had people attacking me. It was crazy, and I just thought, like, oh, it's just empirical data, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the empirical data can't make people mad. Yes, it can.
Oh yeah. That's why Eddie Russell hates you.
Yeah, well, that's. That's because I'm sensitive to isoamyl acetate and I tasted banana as whiskey. That was not my fault, okay? And in fairness, I wasn't going to tell anybody. Someone outed me for tasting banana in Eddie's whiskey. So Eddie, if you're seeing this, I love your product, and I usually don't taste banana. And when I went back and tasted it, it was a little less banana than I thought it was. It was actually a little bit more nutty, like a little peanut butter flavor. Anyway, I digress. So I say all that to say this. What I hope that the book says is that Texas whiskey is creating its own space in the whiskey category.
I'm so glad you said that.
And that people need to go into it with an open mind and judge it strictly based on its flavor. Mm-hmm. And that if you don't like it, don't avoid it forever. Because Texas whiskey is new.
Baby.
Because we didn't have any Texas whiskey producers from Prohibition all the way up until about 12, 13 years ago, right?
Yep.
And because of that, nobody knew how to make whiskey in Texas, and they're still trying to figure out their style. They're experimenting with all different types of things, different barrel toastings and chars and different sizes of barrels and different aging environments, and in a brick building, in an underground facility, all kinds of things to try and control the extraction from the barrel because of the high heat and temperature swings that we have here in Texas. And as a result, the speed of innovation in the Texas whiskey scene is mind-blowing. Nothing like Kentucky. Kentucky changes like at a snail's pace because they don't want to change anything, right? And maybe they shouldn't, right? Kentucky is the king of bourbon for a reason.
They always will be.
But Texas is still finding its way. And so I hope that we explain to people it's not meant to taste like Kentucky bourbon. We're finding our own space in the whiskey world. Try it based on its flavor, and if you don't like it, give it a year or two and try it again. Because if you try something that's a couple years that came out a couple years ago, next to the current releases, almost across the board, all of the current releases blow this stuff away just from 2 years ago.
Yep.
Based on flavor. And so that's my heart for Texas whiskey. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's fascinating. That's a beautiful answer. And I think that God, what did you say? I don't remember exactly what you said, but when you said it, I was like, oh, cool. That's a quote. That's totally going in the book. Like, there's going to be each of the chapters start with a quote.
Yeah,
that's going to be one of them.
Quote.
Like, no question. I think it was about the speed of innovation in the state of Texas.
It is insane. Yeah.
So if I had to answer what is the tradition of Texas whiskey, to me, without question, the answer is creativity.
Okay.
100%.
I like that.
And I think that it's because we're not Kentucky. It's because we don't have tradition. It's because we are building it now and we are making it our own and we are figuring it out. And the opportunities that we have here and the variances in this state, and not only in like the grain that we get to the climate that we have. I had never, have you been to Paladuro Canyon? Mm-mm. I'd never been to Paladuro Canyon. We did a little family vacation, so we drove up through Amarillo and we went to Paladuro Canyon. When we were in the canyon, it was 115 degrees. And the thing that because I'm in whiskey land right now, and the thing that I just kept thinking about was, where in the world else are there legitimately 105 degree swings within a year as far as your weather goes? Because I know I've seen negative 10 degrees in Amarillo on some weather map as a kid. Like, hell, I might have seen negative 25 for all I know. But like the fact that it's 100 degree swing yearly, and that's just like one example of the vastness that is Texas and the variances that they have to deal with here.
Right.
And like you're saying, with the Kentucky is Kentucky and it's been around forever. And if you open up a distillery in Kentucky, you better be making one thing. with all due respect.
Right.
If you want to make money, you're going to be making one thing.
That's why
and you're not going to make any money for 4 years.
I respect the crap out of the Copper and Kings guys, right? Yeah. I mean, they're known for brandy in the middle of Kentucky bourbon land, but I feel like they're well respected. But no, I mean, that is a very interesting point. The barrel's life, its breathing, is a major contributing factor to the whiskey. Some studies show 60, 70, 80% of the flavor is coming from the maturation process, right? So the way I like to explain Texas whiskey to people is that when whiskey is aging in a barrel, it's moving in and out of the wood, right? And so some of what it's doing is it's extracting things out of the wood, right? Some of what it's doing is the char inside the barrel is filtering things out of the whiskey. So it's taking things out of the distillate and it's putting some things into the distillate. But it's also breathing because oxygen gets inside the barrel, and the oxygen being present inside the barrel allows for, certain chemical reactions that cause things to combine, that create new flavors, esterification, things like that. And so some of those processes are mostly affected by time, and some of those processes are affected by extraction. And we have infinitely more extraction than they have in more traditional whiskey producing areas like Kentucky, Scotland. Southern Indiana, Scotland, even Tennessee. And so the big challenge in Texas has been, how do we give the whiskey the time that it needs in the barrel for those chemical reactions to take place that make us feel like the whiskey is mature and it's not young and grainy and it's got complexity of flavor, but not so much wood extraction that that's the only thing that you taste. And so if you look around in the Texas whiskey scene, people are doing all kinds of things differently just to fix that problem. So they're using larger barrels. They're using barrels that are made from narrower staves because we know from studies that the oxygen that's necessary for the aging process comes in between the staves, not through the wood. So the more seeds...
Who are you talking about specifically right now?
That's Balcones.
Okay, gotcha.
So Balcones actually pays more money for their barrels than everybody else because their barrels have an average stave count of like 38, where most barrels are around 28.
Gotcha.
So that's going to increase the rate of oxidation. I always say oxidization, and then smart people will correct me. Oxidation, and that's going to give that barrel more oxygen so that those chemical reactions can take place faster. They're also using a larger barrel. They use wine barrels and not traditional 53-gallon barrels. And that larger...
Not across the board.
They do.
Across the board?
Yeah.
I haven't been down there yet.
They still have some 53 gallons
Sure,
and whatnot.
I'm sure they've got some 30s somewhere.
But for the most part, all their new fill is going into the larger barrels because they need to reduce the extraction rate and reduce the amount of contact that the distillate has inside the barrel because they need it sitting in there with the oxygen for those chemical reactions to take place.
Interesting.
And then I find it very fascinating that a lot of Texas distilleries use a toasted and a charred barrel. And that's, with the exception of Brown-Forman, who has their own cooperage and they make their own toasted and charred barrels, I think they're the only major producer in Kentucky that uses a toasting process on the barrel. And for those of you who don't know, the toasting breaks down the lignin in the wood. It makes the whiskey extract more vanillin and wood sugar flavors, wood sugar notes out of the barrel. And if you drink a whiskey that's been in a toasted barrel, it starts to taste like a s'more. There's like a caramelized sugar flavor, like the burnt marshmallow, and some chocolatey notes that come through. And a lot of Texas whiskeys have that. And I don't exactly know why so many people gone that direction, except for that I think it makes the whiskey taste better when it's younger.
That makes sense. Of course.
Since Texas whiskey had an uphill battle from the beginning, and it cost an awful lot of money to start a distillery, everybody was trying to find a way to make a whiskey that didn't taste terrible that they could sell in under 2 years. Right. And so, we're still trying to figure all that stuff out.
Man, there's so many variables and there's so many ways to just approach it. it's so Texas of our Texas whiskey industry to just not give an F. And it's like, nah, man, we'll just try it. Like, just go, go, throw it in that and do that with it. We'll see what happens. And I mean, well, it's only going to be in there for a year and a half anyway. Right. So,
whatever. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, and then you look at a place like, Balcones is one of the leaders in terms of innovation in Texas. Look at how many cola approvals they have. How many SKUs they have. It is insane the number of lines that they have because they do so much experimenting. Yeah. And they're like, well, we got to sell it. Let's,
Distillery only. Let's go.
Let's go. Let's make another SKU, another label,
Yeah, totally.
So I can respect that. But I make a prediction about the Texas whiskey industry. And that is this. Texas has an international brand. Okay. And you can go to Japan and you can say Texas.
Yep.
And they know what you're talking about, and they associate good things with Texas, right?
Yep.
People get excited about Texas all around the world. And the fact that no producer has been able to penetrate the international market and take advantage of that Texas brand has a lot to do with the lack of capital that's flown into the Texas whiskey industry and the size and the scale and the scope, right? Now, that haven't been said. Carlos de Aldecoa down at Gulf Coast.
I think I'm hanging with him on Monday.
I love that man. Awesome guy. So when he decided to start a distillery, he decided, I'm coming in at scale, right? And his distillery, if my math was correct, because I've been to MGPI and I saw all their fermenters, right? And I asked what their fermenting capacity was. And I've been to his place and I've seen all his fermenters. He's got 636,000 gallon fermenters. He's got true column still that was actually it was purchased from a very large distillery in Kentucky. He got a cease and desist, but he actually told him to screw off. I'll tell anybody I want. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to get the letter.
Right.
And so
tell me offline. Tell me later.
His capacity is 7,000 barrels a month. No one in Texas is anywhere near, like, most of them are 700, and those are pretty large, right? A lot of them are 150, 200, 300 barrels a year. And so what he's trying to do is make whiskey at a scale that it's inexpensive enough that it can be shipped overseas. You can pay all of those stupid tariffs and all of that stuff and still be at a competitive price. And when that happens is when I believe that Texas whiskey is really going to make its mark and be a stop on the map of the whiskey world.
Interesting.
And I don't think there's anything anybody could do to stop that.
Do you know what's going on with Yellow Rose? I really want to pull out my phone and look this up right now, but they were purchased by the people who own, not purchased, they have a heavy investment by the people who own Liqueur 43. And they are now primarily distributing in the UK.
Nice.
And like most of their stuff goes there. Right. And they've like it's a Spanish company and they're pushing it hard in Europe right now. Yellow Rose. Just FYI. It's I had a nice conversation with Houston Ferris's the distiller. But then like subsequently, I forget the name of this company. But I talked with one of those guys and basically like their whole it was that whole thing.
Right.
It was basically
capitalizing on that.
Like Texas is an international brand. We had the opportunity to take advantage of this. Whiskey from the United States, particularly bourbon, is seen in a very particular light. And the fact that Texas is Texas, and like nobody's taking advantage of this. So like this is literally why we invested in this company, and this is why we've taken that and we are pushing it as hard as we can in Europe. And if Carlos is planning the same thing, then that's
what Carlos is planning will be much larger.
Yep.
Because he'll be able to sell aged bottles of whiskey in the $20 range.
Right.
Which currently
That's
nobody
true.
in the state of Texas has economies of scale large enough to get their prices down that low.
Yep.
Right. And so that's part of what gets me really excited about what's going on in the Texas whiskey scene, because I feel like
it's the same thing, man. Like it's our creativity is our tradition. Like you've got every Blackland using the ice still. What Jared's doing at Balcones, the way that like the tradition based like just steadfastness of Dan Garrison, the way that Iron Root is approaching corn, the way that Ty is using rainwater, like all of these things on top of each other. To freaking Dan Whittington doing this crowdsourced whiskey company, which is incredibly cool.
Yeah.
And the way that he's going about the thing, like there's so much creativity in this state. It's amazing. Like that's my favorite thing about this entire process is the fact that like, God, it would have been boring if like it would have been great. Write a whiskey book about Kentucky, and then everyone tells you about what happened 150 years ago. And the story is basically the same, you just swap characters. But here it's like, nah, man, we got this computer that makes our whiskey for us. Like, okay, tell me more. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
You know.
What's the coolest thing that's happened to you in whiskey?
It's a Dave Pickerel story.
Okay.
So I knew Dave. I've met Dave. Dave's around, and like I'm in the cocktail scene, so I've known Dave. And so Dave is constantly at all of the events, and he'll do the things and whatever. And so I knew Dave, and he was going to do, it was probably like right after Tales of the Cocktail, and he was doing a swing through Texas. Anyway, I was over at the Standard Pour, and Dave was doing a tasting at like 6. And I kind of had nothing going on, so I showed up at like 5:30. And he's just sitting there by himself up at the bar. And so I walk up, and I'm like, hey, man, what's going on? And he's like, oh, dude, good to see you. Like, we kind of have our back and forth, have our conversation. And I'm like, so what are you doing? It's like, so what are you up to? Like, what's upcoming? Because he was just there to kind of pimp Whistle Pig in general. It wasn't like a thing. And he's like, actually, I'm working on this project called Old World. I'm like, okay, what is it? He's like, well, so we took the juice and we are aging it. We're finishing it in port and Madeira and Solera. And it's going to end up being sort of this combination of finished rye. And I'm like, okay, that's really cool. He's like, actually, hang on. Can I, and he calls a bartender over. He's like, hey, can you give me 3 glasses? I'm like, okay, sure. 3 glasses, and he pours the Madeira. And I get to taste the Madeira by itself. He pours the port.
What's he pouring them out of?
He's pouring out like tiny little unmarked bottles out of his backpack.
Okay, gotcha.
And so he's just kind of, here's a little bit, here's the port, here's the Madeira, here's the Solera. Like, you know, just kind of going through them all. I'm tasting all of them. I'm like, man, this is really... And I'm like, and so this is a blend. And he's like, yeah. Like, you're not gonna sell any of these individually because like the Madeira is like unbelievable. The port's really interesting. Blah blah blah. And he's like, no, it's gonna be a blend. I'm like, that's. I look forward to seeing what that tastes like. And he's like, well, hey, give me another glass. And he fucking blends like live blends Old World for me. And he's kind of like. Do boop. Yeah, it kind of tastes like that. And it slides it over to me, and I'm just like, this just happened.
Yeah.
This is literally Dave Pickerel just live blended whiskey for me. I feel like I had a ticket to Nirvana's performance on MTV Live. I'm like, MTV Unplugged. I'm like, he just live blended whiskey for me, and I tasted it, and it's amazing.
Right.
It's freaking Old World. It's incredible. And like at that moment, I was just kind of like, all right, okay, this is pretty amazing. And so like, as far as all of the whiskey things that has ever happened to me, totally, Dave Pickerel live blending a whiskey for me is easily the coolest thing that's ever happened to me as far as whiskey goes.
Yeah, and I have 10 stories like that. You know, just because that's just how whiskey people are.
Yep.
You know, they're so great, they're so gracious, they're, you know, and I like to ask people like, what's your most memorable experience that you've had in this? And what I've noticed that's remarkable is that is a hard question for people to answer.
It should be.
Because they've just had so many great experiences.
Because they've had so many.
And in their mind, they're like, yeah, I don't want to be disrespectful to that memory because it's great, and I don't want to be disrespectful to that memory. Mm-hmm. And so I've started asking the question different to say, what are your, top 2 or 3 most memorable, blah, 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 so that they don't feel the pressure to limit it to just one.
Right.
And, I mean, this industry is just so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's absolutely incredible, and the more that you kind of get into it, and the more that you actually have an opportunity to experience the people that are making this stuff, I mean, you realize that they are above all else, they are artists, and above all else, they are service industry. Mm-hmm. And it's this incredible combination of graciousness and creativity that I've literally never seen and from an arts background, mm-hmm. it's graciousness and creativity that in a combination that I've never seen.
That's amazing.
It's fantastic. It's an absolute blessing to be a part of this whole thing, and just there's a lot of pressure, dude. I'm writing this damn book it's gonna be what you find when you Google Texas whiskey.
Yeah.
And the words that I put into this are going to be what the layman reads. The person who's in Maine who just saw TX whiskey on the shelf at their liquor store, but wasn't sure and didn't buy it, but went home and was like, I didn't even know that Texas made whiskey. As soon as they start this journey, all right,
yeah,
I got to get this right.
So here's the thing. So it's bigger than that.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Way bigger.
Perfect.
And here's why. Let's say somebody said, hey, go write a book about Kentucky bourbon.
Now it's lost in the shuffle.
I know, it'd be lost in the shuffle. That's not the point I'm trying to make. You would be going back and trying to find some news article that was written in 1830.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Well, we're in the 1830 time period of Texas whiskey. And so 300 years from now, someone's going to try.
Oh, I know.
Someone is going to be trying to figure out the origin.
Where did Garrison Brothers come
Texas
from?
Whiskey,
what did Balcones start as?
And they're going to read your book.
I know.
In 300 years.
I know. But, I'm arrogant enough to think that I'm the one who should be writing this book, so if I can bring it on. Why not? I've done it before. Might as well do it again.
Why don't you tell the people how they can find your stuff? They can find you.
You can find me at Dr. Nico Martini on Twitter. You can also find me at texascocktails.com. It's probably going to be texaswhiskeybook.com. It's probably going to end up being the website. And I've got that as well on Twitter or on Instagram. If you look up either Texas Cocktails or Texas Whiskey Book, that would be me.
Awesome.
And buy all of the books for all of your friends and enemies. All of them.
Yeah, all of them. Everybody should have one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like buttholes. Anyways, so if you want more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can find us at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube /Bourbon Real Talk. And you can look us up on Instagram on your favorite podcast player. We'd love it if you would subscribe, review. That helps more people find this content.
Do it.
And if you woke up this morning and you were unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you. And I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk.
He loves you.
This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com /shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening.